very privileged and happy to have Matt Bekker from the Department of Geography as our speaker this this time, and we have he's got some great things prepared for us today. We're going to start with a prayer on our food, those that have lunch and those that are going to eat lunch at some point, by Ruth Carey, who's a new faculty member in geography. And after her prayer, I'll briefly introduce Matt, and then we'll get going. So, man, thank you. Thanks, Ruth. So, Matt, one of the deals you have when you win a teaching award in the college is a very likely opportunity to be asked to give a Master Teaching Lunch. And so we're grateful for Matt willing to do this. He received the FHSS Achievement in Teaching Award this past year. And Matt's a great teacher. He'll be talking about some of the things he's done with experiential learning, thoughts he has that way. He his research in dendrochronology and studying trees and the relationship to a variety of things, including climate change. And he has used that expertise in terms of teaching his students, getting them out into the field and doing field work with them. And he's a good example of that in our department and in the college. That way, he's also been the Alcuin Fellow with General Education, teaches general education course in natural hazards that we have in our department. And he has taught these unexpected connections courses that they have in honors that really allow you to interface your work, just like in the forum that we just had about range and importance of not just being specialized, but being more well-rounded and connecting a variety of fields. That's what he's done in his work in teaching in the honors program. So grateful for Matt and the great work he does, and I'd like to turn the time over to him. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you, Sam. I'm going to go ahead and, I'm disabled on screen sharing. There we go.
So it should be able to do it. There we go. Yeah.
There we go. Looks okay now. All right. Thank you, Sam, and thanks, Ruth, for that very nice prayer. So I'm happy to be able to share some of my thoughts and experiences in teaching with you today. I've missed most of these teaching lunches, at least live, ironically, because of my teaching schedule. It seems like I'm always teaching at noon, and it doesn't matter if it's on a Tuesday or a Monday or a Wednesday. I always happen to be teaching during a lot of these past lunches. But if some of you don't know this already, these are recorded and they're available to watch anytime, which was really nice for me because I was able to go back and catch up on some of these, and I learned a ton from all of you, from the previous Master Teaching Lunch folks. And I hope that the perspective and experiences that I share today will add to those. There might be some repetition, but I hope that kind of my personal version of it will be valuable to you in some way. One thing that was kind of a common theme in looking at the previous teaching lunches was the lack of training that we all get in pedagogy. And I remember when I was giving a guest lecture in one of my professor's classes at the University of Iowa, I followed a student in that class who was in education and gave this really incredibly charismatic presentation. And I kind of stood up there and went, okay, I'm going to talk about what my stuff next. And I just felt like, wow, I have no training in pedagogy. And why don't we get more of that in academia? We get so much training in research and so much training in how to write papers and write grants and this and that and the other thing, but we don't get a lot of training in pedagogy. At least I didn't. And maybe that's why another common theme that I heard in these previous teaching lunches was imposter syndrome. And it was kind of interesting to me because if we're all imposters, there's something wrong with that. But that made me think that we should probably keep in mind that a lot of our students feel that way too. And I know a lot of our students feel that way. So that's something for us to keep in mind and that I'll be bringing up later. So I got the title for my talk today from this song by the White Stripes, We're Going to Be Friends. And you might recognize the song from one of these movies. And this is actually how I start off all of my classes. I start off with the song of the day, and that relates to class material in some way. For example, as I'm teaching this class, if you will, I'll mention here that this song has the most meaning. The movie that has the most meaning to me of the three that have used this song is Curious George. Because when my youngest son was born, he was really into Curious George. And so I spent a lot of time watching that with him. And so I associate this song with that memory of watching Curious George with him. And it's a fun family memory. And one of my goals for this talk is to kind of demonstrate how I've tried to make that sort of personal connection with students. So that's how I would have done that if I were sharing this with students. Now, of course, I didn't come up with the idea of having a song of the day. I was talking with a colleague when I was doing my research for my dissertation, and I had just gotten the job at BYU and was about to start teaching, and he mentioned something about having this class of the day or song of the day. And I thought, oh, that's a really good idea. I kind of like music, so I'm going to do that. And initially, that's all it was just I wanted to play music because I liked music. And I thought maybe it'd be a good way to break the ice at the beginning of the class. But it has kind of developed into and morphed into a teaching tool in all of my classes where I'll play the song and we'll actually discuss the lyrics as it relates to the class. I have some writing assignments. I have exam questions that are related to those songs to help them try to make some sort of a connection with the course material that might go beyond, taking a quiz or taking an exam, and kind of typical questions there. It's also, though, it's a chance for them to get to know me better. Now, they might already know the song, and so there might be a shared connection there. But even if they don't know the song, they've now learned something new about me. I may mention something about liking that song or not liking that song or whatever. And so there's that unshared experience that gives them a new experience. They learn something about me. Maybe a student will make a comment about the song and I learn something new about them. But the reason why I chose this particular song for this presentation is if you read through it, it's talking about resting on the ground, looking at the bugs they found, chasing the ants and worms, all of which to me are learning experiences, are observational experiences. And then at the bottom, numbers, letters, learn to spell, nouns and books, show and tell. We clean up and now it's time to learn is the next line in that song. It kind of suggesting that we only learn in the classroom with those numbers and letters and nouns and books and pens and things like that. So I'm a physical geographer. I work outside in my research most of the time. And this outdoorsy stuff therefore comes kind of naturally to me. I thought it was funny that Mike Searcy gave one of these presentations just last fall. It seems like Mike and I always end up together in these experiential learning workshops and things like that. And we've discussed with each other, kind of sheepishly how easy it is for us to contribute to experiential learning, as a meme would say. We were doing experiential learning before it was cool. So it's easy for us to kind of talk about and do experiential learning. But I recognize that's not the case for all of us. And I want to mention that although I do a lot of experiential learning and I do a lot of outdoorsy stuff for my research, I'm still a lecturer. All of my classes are primarily lecture format. I use PowerPoint just like I'm using it here. So I can relate a little bit to this idea of having sort of a standard cleaned up lecture class, if you will. And so I'm going to be sharing not only my outdoorsy experiential, kind of normal experiential learning experiences, but also try to discuss ways that we can enhance more normal teaching with experiences and inspiration. In any case, the whole thing is designed to help all of us think about doing things maybe a little bit differently than the way that we've done them, or see things a little bit differently. So first of all, I'll talk about getting dirty, what I think of as normal experiential learning. Nice photo of my granddaughter here. I don't think I fully understood President Benson's talk on pride until I had a granddaughter, and now I fully understand that my granddaughter really is cuter than yours. So But you notice she loves getting dirty. She loves being outside, and she's experiencing the world through getting dirty. And I first of all want to start off by talking about how that can be a valuable experience. Working with students in research can be very beneficial, and it can be very challenging, as I'm sure many of you already know. I involve students in my research. We go out into the field. They help me collect samples, process those samples, analyze the data, and to some extent, as we'll talk about in a little bit, work together with me on presentations and articles from that research. Now, to some extent, I'm absolutely dependent on these students because the work that I do is sufficiently labor intensive that it just wouldn't get done if I didn't have that help with sample collection and sample processing and so on. But I try to make it more than just cheap labor. Try to give them an opportunity to really learn from these experiences. In addition to involving them directly in my research, I've tried then to take my research and make that a direct learning experience. For a few years at least, I had a field methods course. I haven't done that as much recently. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is it is absolutely challenging. It's logistically challenging. It's expensive, and it takes a lot of time. For the first few years that I did this, I took students to Yellowstone National Park, and we did research in the park there. We did 3 years of these classes there, and I think ultimately I got 2 papers out of the deal. So it was a lot of work that went into the class, a lot of time spent, 2 or 3 weeks in Yellowstone each time, in addition to our class time at BYU. And that's not a bad ratio to have a couple of classes, 3 classes, and get a couple of papers out of the deal. But the students got to have really valuable experiences from that, not just being in the national park, but we went there and got in touch with some of the rangers there and got involved with the research that they were doing. So they saw a different perspective on research from them. We learned about internship experiences. We went into the park headquarters and looked at their GIS lab and talked about how students could potentially get a job in those areas. So a valuable experience, but I'll freely admit it took a lot of effort, took a lot of time. Some benefit in terms of the research publications, but also just a lot of benefit in watching students learn new things and grow a lot. One theme that I learned from that, both in my research and through these field methods courses, is that even though it takes a lot of effort to train the students and to make sure that we're teaching them in these outdoorsy experiential type of situations, I've learned that they can really benefit what we're doing as well. And here's an example. So my research often involves very long hikes up to high elevations. These are some old limber pine trees that are up at about 9,000 feet on the mountains just to our east. And it was about a 2,000-foot vertical gain to get to these trees. So it's a lot of physical work. We went up there and sampled these trees, and this was when we had a graduate program early in my time at BYU. This was one of my graduate students. And after hauling him up and down these mountains a couple of times, sampling some of these trees for climate analyses, he had kind of learned from me how to identify what the conditions were where you would tend to find these very old climate sensitive trees. And he had a lot more remote sensing and GIS experience than I did. And he was able to use those skills to say, not only where are we likely to find more of these very old, gnarly climate sensitive trees, but also a simple question, where are the roads? So we don't have to hike up 2,000 feet to get to these trees. And after doing that, he kind of just built up this model. And he found a site that was likely to have some very old trees that was about 300 feet from roads. And so we drove up there, and what do you know, we found the oldest known limber pine tree anywhere on the earth. This is a 1,700-year-old tree, which is kind of cool for bragging rights, but it's also very valuable for climate because we're able to go farther back in time with our climate record. And so had I not been working with the student, I probably never would have known about that tree. We wouldn't have had as impressive of a tree ring record. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but you can get some benefits from working with these students as well. Something to keep in mind. Here's another experience working with a student. Now, in this case, this was not a geography student, but a geology student who just knocked on my door one day. He was taking a class from me and said, "Hey, I'd like to get involved in research with you." And I was already kind of interested in geology, but he was very interested in geology. So we took his interest in geology and earthquakes in particular, my experience in geology and geography and my tree ring experience, and we put together this study on how trees responded to this earthquake that occurred back in 1983 in Idaho. Now I published with this student, but you notice first of all that I'm the first author, and I'm going to show you a couple of these papers, and I'm the first author on all of them. And that's because I wrote the paper. It's difficult, I will freely admit, to get an undergraduate student to the point that they can write a paper before they graduate. Usually when undergraduate students come and talk to me, they're already at least a sophomore, probably a junior, so I only have a couple of years to work with them. And this is their first experience in writing a publication quality type of paper. So I've not yet had the experience of having an undergraduate student be the first author on a paper, although I've tried to give them that experience. And it has taken a lot of work, once again, to get them to the point where they can even be a co-author. Now, in this case, this student just happened to have a pretty extreme case, if you will, of ADHD. And as luck would have it, so do I. So this was kind of a challenging project to have two people working together. This was published 2 years ago in 2018, but we started this project in 2010. So it took us 8 years to put this study together into a publication quality piece of work, but it got into a very good journal, and we're both pretty proud of it. Take home message is it can be really difficult, it can be really challenging, but it can also be beneficial to work with students. Another publication with a student here, where again, it was an attempt to try to give the student the chance to write the paper himself. He graduated, got busy with other things, so I took it over and finished the paper. But this student was able to help me out in the field, and gets to tell his family that he got to chop up some pieces of the Salt Lake Tabernacle, but also got to be involved in a pretty fun project. He didn't write the paper, but he did give a presentation at a conference, and that's the next thing I want to discuss. This is a little bit less effort to get a student to a point where they can give a presentation, especially if it's at a regional conference, as this student gave a presentation at a regional conference, a little bit lower stakes, a smaller group, a little bit less nerve-wracking. And of course, we also have our Fulton conference. And I want to use Michaela Dufer's words from her talk last fall. She said, the Fulton conference is a thing. These presentations are a thing. Working on field research is a thing. It's something that the student can kind of hang their hat on and add to their resume or their CV. And even have a copy of the poster to show to people as they're looking for graduate schools or jobs and things like that. So we have this great opportunity in kind of a low stress environment to have students produce a poster at the Fulton conference. I've tried to get students to give presentations at regional conferences, or as you see in these two photos, national conferences. In the case of Los Angeles, it was really easy. We had a van where we packed up a bunch of students and took them to the meeting. And I had 5 students that gave poster presentations there. I've had some students give oral presentations. That's a little bit more challenging at these big national meetings, a little more nerve-wracking, but we've been able to pull that off. One suggestion I would have is I've talked about how difficult this can be. One thing you want to try to do is build a network with some other people and see if those folks can either help you with, or in some cases do a lot of the groundwork themselves. This is a photo from what's called the North American Dendroecological Field Week. It's a tree ring field week that some people have been working on now for a good 25 years. So it's a very well organized, consistent field week that's put on every year. And I got involved in that as a participant the first couple of times, but then I was invited to be an instructor. And I've done that 4 or 5 times now. And it's a great opportunity for me to go and do the teaching there at this field week, but also bring a student with me. So this is a BYU student that attended with me this year. I've had as many as 4 students come with me to these field weeks. All of the logistics, the planning, the lodging, the general sites are already taken care of. I just have to show up, choose a particular site. Students come and join my group with my team teacher. And within 10 days, we've run the students through field work, which you're seeing here in a beautiful area like the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And then they get the experience of taking those samples, processing those samples, analyzing the data, giving a presentation, and writing a report, all within about a week and a half. So it's very intensive, but it's a great experience for the students. And it's not publication quality, but we've already have the start. We, meaning the leaders of these groups, already have the start of potentially a publication that has come from this field week. So look for opportunities to join on with others who have already done a lot of that hard work that I've been mentioning. Okay, so that's kind of a summary of some of my what I would consider normal, as we think of it, experiential experiences, experiential learning opportunities for students. For the remainder of the talk, I want to discuss how we might be able to bring in some of these experiences and inspire students a little bit more, even in these lecture style situations, what I'm referring to here, based on the song, as cleaned up teaching. And again, most of my teaching is kind of standard, organized, structured lecture using PowerPoint. But even that, we can bring in a lot more, I think, observations and experiences, and certainly be inspiring in our teaching. So number 1, enthusiasm. My favorite student comment I've ever had, the most meaningful student comment I've ever had, was that I was simply kind of spazzy. I took that as a compliment. To me, what that meant was I'm very enthusiastic about what I do. And other students have used those words rather than kind of spazzy. I really appreciate the enthusiasm that you show for your discipline. In other words, admittedly, I'm a tree ring nerd. I have a whole bunch of tree ring shirts, probably not as many tree ring shirts as D. Higley has primate shirts, but I got a lot of them. And I was wearing one day. This is that field week that I was just telling you about. And I was wearing one day, and my sister saw it, and she said, "Matt, is that your nerd shirt?" And I said, "Yes." Very proud of my tree ring nerd shirts. So be a little nerdy, be enthusiastic about what you're doing, about what you're teaching, and that should come through to the students. Make it more interesting to them, make it more valuable to them, and they'll probably devote more time to learning if they know that you're that interested in it. I have tried to bring in as many activity-oriented or observation-oriented assignments as I can to my classes. And once again, look for opportunities to build on what other people have already done. For example, BYU Grounds and the College of Life Sciences put together a tree tour, a campus tree tour, a whole bunch of years ago. Some of that is focused on the Arboretum on the hill south of campus. But as you can see, this tour winds all the way through campus, and you can look at all these different trees and learn about them. When I first started this, it was just using a little booklet, a pamphlet that the students could buy from the bookstore. But now, like a whole bunch of other things, it's online. And so I send the students out for one of their assignments to take this tree tour and answer some questions about the trees that they're learning about. A lot of students, probably most of our students, don't realize that we have a living fossil right next to the testing center as they're walking in there to meet their impending doom to take their exams. They probably don't realize what a cool tree that is that's sitting right outside of the testing center. It's a deciduous conifer, loses its needles in the winter, so that's kind of a cool thing. Tree nerd is coming through, I know, but that's really a cool thing to me that we have one of these really ancient trees, a relative of the coast redwoods, a relative of the giant sequoias, but one that has this deciduous habit because it evolved in an area where conditions were colder. And so it has this deciduous habit. And we have that right here on campus. But the goal is to get the students out of the classroom, get them out of the textbook and into something that they can observe and look at and feel. I actually have them pull some needles off the trees and make some comparisons. very tactile, where they can make those kinds of connections that they would.
What kind of tree is that, Matt? I'm sorry.
That's a dawn redwood.
Dawn redwood. Okay,
Dawn
thanks.
redwood. So yeah, go check it out today. Cool tree. And it's going to look like it's dead because it's winter, right? But it's not. Very similar point here. Find apps that might be related to what you're teaching. Again, I admit this is relatively easy for me because a lot of these apps are sort of outdoor oriented. One that somebody just told me about last year is called Seek, S-E-E-K. Incredible app. What you do is you turn on this app and you go outside and you point your camera to the tree, or you point your camera to the insect. And if you get kind of enough different perspectives on it, you have to kind of move your camera around a little bit, it can tell you what that plant is, that tree is, that insect is to the species. And so I was really happy to be able to have this app myself, just to be able to learn about things that I don't know as much about, but also to be able to use that in my classes. I haven't folded it in as much yet as I would like to, but planning on doing that in the near future. I was walking back from the Mazer building last fall to my office, and there was a praying mantis walking across the sidewalk. And I said, oh, I don't know anything about mantids, so I'm going to learn what species this is. So I pulled out the app, and it took me a little bit to get the right angles, but it actually got that to species. It's a Chinese mantis, and it is an introduced species, hence the Chinese mantis name. And then I dropped the ball. I had the perfect opportunity to bring that into my class as we were talking about introduced species, and I just forgot about it. But I have that information there, and that's something now that I can share with students and say, hey, you should all get this app. And I might even make it part of my tree tour, have them go to some other tree that they don't even know what it is and learn what it is. So again, new learning that they're participating in themselves rather than something that I'm telling them to do, right? So really cool app if you're interested at all in the outdoors. Take advantage of remote learning. So this is kind of my version of making lemonade out of the COVID-19 lemons. So my class last fall had quite a few students in it, and so it was entirely remote. And I made it remote and asynchronous. I recorded all of my lectures, and I decided to record most of those lectures outside. Now, some of that was forced because I had too much competition inside with a bunch of kids who were all on Zoom and doing this and that. So I went outside where it was a little bit quieter and recorded my lecture outside. And what I was thinking with this was, it might not make any difference to most of you if you're outside or inside, but even in the future, when we don't have to be remote, you could record a lecture at some place that's relevant to your teaching material. And now that we have these tools and we've kind of gotten used to using these tools, we want to be in the classroom with the students as much as we can, but we could use these remote tools to benefit us in the future. One of the things so I mentioned having less competition with the noise in my house, but another area of nerdness for me is I've become a bird nerd, and I put a lot of feeders out in my backyard. This has also been a result of the coronavirus, as we were trying to find things that we could do as a family that would keep us away from large groups of people. We kind of stumbled into birding as a hobby. And if you've seen the movie, The Big Year, it is not bird watching. It goes beyond that. It's identifying birds to species and keeping track of which birds you've seen in different areas. So in addition to a tree ring nerd, I've become a full bird nerd. I've become a birder and learned to identify species. I've seen 200-ish different species over the last year, basically since coronavirus started. And that fit in perfectly to my biogeography class last fall. As we're talking about distributions of species, I could go outside of the textbook and even go outside of pictures of birds that might be on the internet. These are my photos, and maybe that doesn't really make any difference to the students, but it seemed to me like it would make a difference to them that these are all birds that I've seen in my backyard. Now, these are all actually the same species, different varieties of the same species. So we talked about the differences in the coloring and the patterns of plumage on these birds and why those patterns exist, where the winter homes are for these birds and where the breeding homes are for these birds. So it might be a shared experience, but probably a unique experience. There probably aren't other students in my classes who are birders, maybe one or two. But if nothing else, it's a unique experience. But the shared experience is that it's a human experience. It's my experience. And again, gives them a chance to kind of learn about making observations directly outside. And coming back to this, this slide, I mentioned not having as much competition for the noise inside, but I did have a lot of competition with the birds outside, because I have all these feeders up and they were making a lot of racket. But then I kind of tied that into the class as we were discussing. Oh, by the way, that's a scrub jay making all that noise behind me, and there's a couple of house finches over there. So you take a difficult situation and try to tie it into the class and make it a valuable thing. Family experiences in general. So I want to emphasize here, try to make these personal experiences, because if they're personal, by definition, they're shared, they're human experiences. And there might be places that I'm talking about or birds that I've seen that other people have seen, or they might be new. And those unique experiences can be valuable to the students as well. My family knows that when we're on vacation, and this is maybe something that we all, I don't know if we should do this or not, it could be a good thing, but for me, my classes are kind of always in the back of my mind. And when I see something that is relevant to my classes, we have to pull over on the side of the road, or we have to stop what we're doing on the beach for just a minute and take some pictures for my classes. And in a way, it kind of becomes a fun thing. I don't get too many groans from my family on that. But so I teach a class in natural hazards and disasters, as Sam mentioned. And when I was watching my kids here build these sandcastles, what's happening in the back of my mind, okay, I know exactly what's going to happen here, and it's going to be directly relevant to my hazards and disasters class. So I just got the camera out and started snapping some pictures of my boys here building their sandcastle. And of course, they know that water could, okay, tell my students, first of all, make some simple observations here. And I relate this to coastal planning issues. Is this wise coastal planning, or is this foolish coastal planning? And most of the students can identify that it's foolish because you can see that the sand is smooth here because the waves have come in as the tide has gone up and down. And it would probably be wiser to build back here or back here, right? So here they are building their castle, and notice they're being super safe. They've got the moat, they've got the seawall, and they're watching very carefully. But despite all those preparations, you know what's going to happen. The tsunami is going to come in and wipe out their settlement. And now they're going to get sued. People are going to get injured. People are going to die because they weren't wise in the first place. And then, of course, what do you do as soon as the tsunami comes? You immediately start to rebuild. So those are the kinds of examples from this family experience that I share with my students. And, you know, we kind of have a laugh about it. But it's a human experience. It's a shared experience. And they can relate, I think, to being out there having fun with family, but still thinking about how it might relate to the class. And that's exactly what I want them to do. I want them in their everyday lives to walk outside and notice things that are relevant to the things they're learning in class. Okay, another suggestion is, and this is something that has also kind of developed gradually over the years. Usually once in a semester, either during midterms or at the end of the semester, wherever it seems like the class stress level is the highest, I will give the students a little bit of a pep talk and some reading for encouragement. It's not an assignment at all. It's just, this is for you to have some encouragement. And I share a couple of devotionals. Now, one thing I think I could improve on is working in our current devotionals and forums into class. I don't always remember to tie those in to class, but I have gone back and identified some devotionals that have include lived experiences, again, shared experiences. Now, I want to mention something here. This was not a term that I was familiar with. Again, I use the excuse that I'm a natural or physical scientist. I had never heard this term before until I was on the Dean Search Committee. And if you looked at that that request as we put the word out, we were looking for lived experiences with diversity. And so I learned what that term means, and now it's a lot more meaningful to me as I think about these devotionals. And the reason why these particular devotionals were meaningful to me is because they're discussing these lived experiences, these shared experiences. So two good ones here that I encourage the students to read through. And if you haven't seen them or read them, I'd encourage you to spend some time with them as well. Here's another one. If you remember when John Tanner was academic vice president, he used to send out these notes from an amateur, I think is what he called them, to the faculty. And he'd do that once a month. And this is one that was particularly meaningful to me and that I thought might be meaningful to the students. And that is that curiosity and passion are more important than intelligence. Curiosity quotient plus passion quotient is greater than intelligence quotient. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but if you're the most curious and the most passionate person in the room, you're going to get really far. And that's the kind of the message I try to emphasize to students with this is they already have some level of intelligence or they wouldn't be here. I talked earlier about this, now I'm even forgetting the word, this imposter syndrome that we often feel. Well, our students feel that too. They don't feel like they belong at BYU sometimes. And I want to use this to try to encourage them to believe that they really do belong here. And if they don't feel like they belong, work on, and they don't feel like maybe they can become a whole lot smarter all of a sudden, we can all work on being more curious. We can all work on being a little bit more passionate. We can always work on being a little bit more nerdy, right? A little more enthusiastic about what we do. And if we do that, it can get us far in life. So a really good essay here by John Tanner that I'd recommend. Okay, this is another one that's on that list of things that I have the students read to try to encourage them to get through, again, either midterms or the end of the semester. And this is one that has a lot of personal meaning to me. When I was going through the tenure process, CFS, I was reading this book, Oliver Twist, to my boys, and was not the favorite year of my career, as it probably isn't for anybody who's going through CFS. But I came across this passage in Oliver Twist, which I won't read through the whole thing, but this is when Oliver's friend Rose, that he's been living with that family, has just recovered from a life-threatening illness, and all of a sudden everything looks clearer and brighter and sounds sweeter and so on. And what I encourage the students to think about is to keep in mind what their own thought process, how much of an effect their own thought process can have on how they're viewing the world. And, you know, we discuss anxiety, we discuss depression, and I say, you can't just wish this kind of stuff away. If you need help, go get the help that you need. And, you know, look for your support crew, talk about CAPS and everything. But we all get a little bit discouraged, and it's really easy to kind of become grouchy and grumpy when we get a little discouraged. And it's important to try to do the best we can to see through those challenges and difficulties. And if we can do that, it'll make a big difference. And this passage really hit me as I was reading that book. And I just remembered, I just stopped and sort of stared off for a minute. My boys were wondering what was going on. As I was just pondering this, yeah, I've really had this sort of grouchy attitude about this CFS process. And it is challenging, but I need to kind of change my attitude a little bit was the take-home message from that. So Sam mentioned that I've had this experience of teaching unexpected connections in honors. Let me highly, highly recommend that to you. Not only for the Alcuin Fellowship and the research money and the stipend, and of course the opportunity to give a presentation that will give you, but it's just a really valuable teaching experience. It has been one of my favorite and most valuable teaching experiences at BYU. So I'm on my last semester of the 3 times teaching this class, and I've been paired up with Dean Duncan, who's in theater and media arts. And it's been such a great experience for me to learn from him, who has a completely different teaching style than I do. And of course, the subject matter is quite different. But that's the whole idea, these unexpected connections to try to bring us together. And the students who take those classes are looking for those unexpected connections. And what I want to share here is something that Dean just shared last week with the class. And it's a clip of his family. And I think that's enough introduction. I'm going to go ahead and click on it and share that with you. I'll give you a little bit more background. This is during a section where he's talking about the themes of sparse and abundant in theater and media arts. And he talks about how some experiences are really, really abundant. And he uses the example of the Ten Commandments and Charlton Heston and the waves and all of this drama and the music. And then he talks about the spirit not being in the earthquake, not being in the fire, and not being in the wind, and the still small voice. And he shares this experience from his family. And I'm going to share about 1.5 minutes total of this, so I'll be skipping around a little bit. I'm going to take just a minute here. I'm going to share the sound on my computer to make sure you can actually hear this. Reshare my screen.
I'm the pirate.
You're the pirate? What have you got there on your hands?
Now Limhi was again filled with joy in learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Mosiah had a gift from God, whereby he could interpret such engravings. Yea, and Ammon also did rejoice. Yet Ammon and his brethren were filled with sorrow, because so many of their brethren had been slain. And also that King Noah and his priests had caused people to commit so many sins and iniquities against God.
No!
And they also did mourn for the death of Abinadi, and also for the departure
No!
of Alma
Yes! No.
and the people that went with him, who had formed a church of God through the strength and power of God, and faith on the words which had been spoken by Abinadi. Okay, Drew, you start on 31, read 2 verses.
How do you feel about Book of Mormon study? What do you know when we say, come study the scriptures, what's your immediate thought? Who? And then what's your immediate action?
Pretend I'm asleep.
What kind of stories are in our scriptures? Who's in?
No, it hasn't ever happened, actually. My goodness, that was a complete disaster.
Spencer was being the booby.
Maddie, did you like that scripture time?
Yeah. I'm a pirate.
Right.
I'm trying to be careful.
You're supposed to follow along, Caitlin.
I don't want to, I'm tired.
Think it's important that our family studies scriptures?
Yes.
If it is important, then why would someone like you, and you're not the only one, kind of disrupt our studies sometimes?
I'm a kid, that's why.
You're the natural man and you're an enemy to God?
No, I'm not an enemy. Sometimes.
Maybe all of us.
And remember that only in and through Christ ye can be saved. Good.
Okay, so I was just, first of all, pleased that Dean was willing to share that very personal part of his family with the class. And the students just loved it because they could relate, right? We've all had experiences like that where it's difficult and it's challenging, but yet it's really just an incredible spiritual experience. Those little tiny bits of spiritual experiences that are amongst all of the chaos. So again, that's a shared experience, maybe a unique experience, but a personal experience that was a valuable teaching tool for the students in the class. The last thing I want to share, this is the tail end of a forum that was given a whole bunch of years ago by Jack Seitz, who's in biology, life sciences at BYU. And his focus was on conservation. And at the end here, he's talking about what it will take for us to be able to sort of come together as a society to actually support conservation and support biodiversity. But it's not just about the biodiversity here, but he mentioned some things that are relevant to some of the things that I've shared today. And so about another minute and a half here, and then I'll wrap this up.
States, we have the knowledge, or we can get the knowledge.
And apologies for the quality on this. This was taped off of TV on a VHS tape, and then I digitized it. So it's gone through a few cycles here.
Tackle these problems. We have or can motivate the resources if we want to. What I'm not sure we have is a unified will or vision to imagine doing things a little bit differently than the way we've always done them. That's really what it'll take. And let me close with a picture of Reelfoot Lake in West Tennessee. This is a place that's special to me. My dad took me here when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. All of the common species at Reelfoot Lake had been named and described a century and a half before I got there, but they were all new to me. I had never seen a place like this. I was captivated. My imagination knew no limits. This literally was the Amazon of my youth. The point I want to make here is that the sense of wonder is something we all have or used to have. Every child is curious about everything. And as we get older, we tend to lose touch. We tend to lose some of that sense of wonder. It's like any other mental faculty. It has to be nurtured and cultivated. And we either get removed from nature, or we acquire unnecessary fears and prejudices that we carry around like excess baggage. Gentle teaching and the patience of a good mentor can strip away the fears and the prejudices. And if we can reconnect with this wonder of our childhood that we all had at one time, the political will be there. It will assemble on its own, and we can make the right ethical choices. Thank you. States,
So just a couple of quotes from that. This idea of the sense of wonder, and really, I guess that's what it's all about for me, is trying to help those students reconnect with that sense of wonder. It doesn't have to be about nature. It can just be about curiosity, reconnecting with that sense of curiosity that they've had about the world at some point in their life. And that may have to be worked on, may have to be developed, but it's there. And also this idea that the second quote that I've underlined, imagining doing things a little bit differently now. That's in the context of trying to support biodiversity. But imagine doing things a little bit differently than the way you've always done them in your teaching. That's what it'll really take. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. That was great. A lot of great ideas and great thoughts shared. And that's a great video on family scripture study. That looks like a normal scripture study to me. So that was nice. So we have a few 10 minutes for those that can stay for questions, discussion. If there's anyone that would like to ask Matt a question or have a comment on what he's shared with us, that'd be great. Just jump in.
Any experiences of throwing your kids under the bus like I did? Something like that? It's always fun. They appreciate it.
Do you still have students do for the natural hazards class, do their own little research project?
Yeah, I actually thought about mentioning that. So that's another example of a student providing a benefit. My first TA for the class helped develop the GIS project that I use now. I am not a GIS person, but we've developed this very simple GIS project that the students use to basically their goal is to try to identify a safe place for their boss to live in Utah County. And it's not a right or wrong thing. It's not the safest square foot of Utah County, but bringing together the concepts into a project where they have a specific goal in mind. Again, I'm trying to get them away from the textbook and away from the quizzes and the exams and think about a real world situation. You were trying to make a recommendation on where to live. What would be your suggestion and why? I also have them go out and do, okay, here's another interesting point. I have them do a self-guided field trip. I used to have them literally drive to a site, but BYU Risk Management decided that it was too risky for them to learn about risk. So now I have to have them go virtually to these sites and kind of observe, what's going on and what could be hazardous, what could be risky, and what kinds of decisions we should make.
Matt, I had a question for you. So when you're putting together these experiential moments, do you also have like an evaluation component to them? And if so, how do you think through how you would grade or assess their performance on something? Because it seems like the doing of it's great learning. But if there's this other component, how do you even come to that, or if you have to?
Yeah, so I guess some of them are maybe more graded than others. So in this unexpected connections class that I have, I do have them go out and I have 3 observations that they make, and that's actually the bulk of the material for the class that they turn in. So it is graded. They're responding to a writing prompt, and essentially it's graded based on how well they make some connections to that writing prompt. But it is admittedly not super duper rigorous. What I really want to see is, do they have some depth to their answer? These songs that I've talked about, when I have some in-class writing experiences. And what I tell them is that these are not quizzes, it's really about the depth, and they're graded primarily on the depth of their answer. Are they really making connections, or are they just trying to write to show me that they know the terminology in the class? If they do that, they're not going to get full credit. The boss relocation project I just mentioned, that one's a little bit more rigorous, has more specific tools tied to it. So it kind of varies.
I've got a question. When you use,
Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. When you use the devotionals, the Aaron Holmes or the Matthew Shumway, you mentioned that you use them. What's the context? I think on one of them, when you talked about the John Tanner piece, you said it was before an examination. Is there a different context that you introduce the other ones for?
So I throw everything together all at once, and it's either right before midterms or right after midterms or right near the end of the semester. I try to just sort of gauge when the stress level is the highest. And I say, here's a whole bunch of stuff you can read to try to keep yourself moving. And, I spend a little bit of time, as I did in this presentation, talking about some of my experience with that. Like I spend a lot of time on the Oliver Twist one and say, look, I can kind of understand to some degree what you're going through here. We all have stressful situations in our lives, and they're very real. And this is one thing that kind of helped me get through it.
I had a question, Matt. Just like my high school geography teacher was a master at this, and we went on these amazing week-long field trips. And geography was the most popular discipline to study in our school because of these trips. But do you think there's any scope for including some sort of like week-long trip?
I do. It's interesting because when I first started in this department, when I was a student, for sure, we did tons of those trips.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started at BYU, we were doing quite a few of them, and they just sort of went away. We have blamed that primarily on risk management, but I think we need to be a little careful. I think we could pull it off if we had a little bit more preparation. I know anthropology, for example, still does things like that. I know geology still does things like that. I think what it's going to take, as I just mentioned, is maybe doing things a little bit differently than the way we've always done them. If we do a little bit more of our homework and making sure that they are safe situations, maybe we can pick that back up again. So Ruth, in short, I would love to reinvestigate that idea and see if we can.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to do just kind of like one class period kind of field work, but it really doesn't. It's
Yeah.
no substitute for a week-long field trip immersed in it.
It's not, and as I said, it takes time, it takes money, it takes planning and preparation and dealing with risk management issues, but it can be done. It just has to be important enough that we actually push through the barriers and do it.
Right. Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
There's one question here from Dave Waddell. Did you see it, Matt?
No.
What do the prompts look like that we use for the writing assignments?
So I guess if we have the songs, for example, in my hazards class, like, so one example is going to come up this week. So we're talking about risk in that class right now. And I play them a song called The Rock by Harry Chapin. And it's about this massive rock that's about to fall on the town and crush the entire town. And one person knows it's going to happen, and he's trying to convince everybody else that that's going to happen and they need to pay attention to it, but they won't listen to him. And so I say, here's the song, here's the lyrics, make some, first of all, very open-ended, make some connections between the lyrics and what we've talked about with risk. And I talk about how do risk managers perceive things, how does the general public perceive things. And then I also have some open-ended question of, can you tie this to something else we've learned about maybe in the previous weeks? The observation assignments and unexpected connections, it's also, I guess, pretty open-ended. What I tell them is go out and make some observations, and you want to connect to these concepts, these principles, and I'll list the concepts and principles that we've talked about as a reminder to them. So I guess the short answer to that is I keep it pretty open-ended. I want to see how they're thinking and processing rather than me telling them this is what you must write about. Sure.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for participating, and thanks Matt for that great presentation. And let's all do great teaching and keep our students going and keep us going, which I think is really important. So enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Thanks so much for participating today.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thanks, Matt.